While we will not point out every discrepancy between these two accounts in their canonical forms, let's highlight a few. For example, when was man created? In Genesis 1:26-27, God creates humanity on the 6th day, the end of the creation period. Furthermore, he creates man and woman at the same time.
And God created humanity in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them.
But what do we see in Genesis 2? Man is God's first creation in Genesis 2:7.
And the Lord God formed the man with dust from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature.
In contrast, woman is his final creation after the garden, vegetation, and animals. And where was humanity supposed to live? In Genesis 1:28-29, we see God's command.
And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over every fish of the sea, and over every bird of the heavens, and over every living thing that creeps upon the ground." And God said, "Look, I have given you every plant-bearing seed that is upon the surface of the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit in it is yours for food."
So God commands humanity to fill the earth and to rule over all the animals that were created. In contrast, we read in Genesis 2:15-17,
And the Lord God took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to tend and guard it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, "From every tree of the garden you may certainly eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you must not eat."
we see that the man and later the woman do remain in the garden until they are driven out as a result of their disobedience. Genesis 3:23. It seems as though the story in Genesis 1 commands them to go into all the world, while they are expected to remain in the garden in Genesis 2. With regards to animals and birds, in Genesis 1 we see that birds were created before the land animals, which were created before mankind. In Genesis 1:20 we read,
And God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly over the earth, over the surface of the vault of the heavens."
We then see,
And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their species, beasts and creeping things, and animals of the earth after their species." And it was so. And God made the animals of the earth according to their species, and the beasts according to their species, and every creeping thing of the ground according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. Genesis 1:24-25.
this all took place on day 6 before humanity had been created. However, in Genesis 2:19 we read,
And the Lord God formed from the ground every animal of the field and every bird of the heavens, and he brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And everything that the man called each living creature, that was its name.
Clearly, in Genesis 1, the birds and land animals are created before mankind, while in Genesis 2, they are created specifically to try and fill a specific role for the man. Again, there are many other problems that can be discussed between these two accounts, but these will suffice. It is interesting to see how some other scholars have attempted to reconcile these contradictory accounts. For example, Victor Hamilton argues that the creation of animals in Genesis 2 is not the first creation of animals, but the creation of a specific group for Adam to name that occurs after the creation of animals in Genesis 1:24-25. Of course, this seems to fly in the face of the natural reading of the verse.
And the Lord God formed from the ground every animal of the field and every bird of the heavens, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And everything that the man named each living animal, that was its name. Genesis 2:19.
In short, there appear to be contradictions between the account of creation given in Genesis 1:1 through 2:4a, and what we see in Genesis 2:4b through 25. We have focused on the contradictions and inconsistencies in the sequence of events that are given in the creation accounts. Although this is but the tip of the iceberg, however, our goal here is only to provide a specific contradiction that can be supported well by the data. The story of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and the snake has had a wide-reaching influence on Western culture throughout the last 2 millennia. But where does this story come from? Is the Eden narrative simply lifted from an ancient Mesopotamian myth? A completely independent work? Or perhaps something in between? In this section, we will provide a brief glimpse into some of the more common parts of the story that can be connected to earlier ancient Near Eastern myths and traditions to see how the story of Adam and Eve relates to earlier texts. While there are a number of aspects in the story that we could investigate at great length, I will try to focus on those portions that find greater overall agreement among scholars in the field concerning their intertextual relationships with older mythology. We will begin with the creation of man, particularly with respect to how he was created, his initial state, and his initial purpose in the garden. We will turn then to Eve, considering the order and method of her creation. Finally, our attention will turn to the theme of the lost chance at immortality that can be seen in the Tree of Life. I need to make something clear from the outset. The Garden of Eden story does not appear to recreate any one mythological text from the ancient Near East. In other words, there does not appear to be another Adam and Eve story, where a Mesopotamian man and woman are created by the gods and they live in and are expelled from a garden because of disobedience to the gods or the like. We can contrast this to the story of the flood in Genesis 6 through 9, which finds another clear parallel in the story of Atrahasis and Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh. What appears in Genesis 2 through 3 is most likely a newly formed myth not directly patterned on a previous story. However, that does not mean that it does not also draw on common themes and motifs, and perhaps even particular myths from the ancient Near East. Notice what Carr writes.
Though Genesis 2-3 does not represent a reformulation of any one of these texts, it features a similar combination of anthropogonic and mortality themes, as that was seen in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Moreover, the Mesopotamian cosmogonic tradition drawn upon in Gilgamesh seems to be part of a broader literary world, in light of which certain features of Genesis 2-3 have particular significance, including the formation of the first human from clay earth, his destiny to work the ground, the focus on divine wisdom, human sexuality and the lost chance at immortality for humans, the human distinction from animals by virtue of wearing clothing, and human multiplication.
I will argue that the author of Genesis 2 through 3 borrowed directly or indirectly from earlier ancient Near Eastern mythologies, as evidenced by the close similarities and the textual and/or cultural availability of these themes and motifs to the writer. A final opening word before we look at the specifics. As we argued in the previous section, both Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 through 3 appear to open their creation accounts by describing the state of affairs before the creative process began. Genesis 2, 4b through 7 reads,
When Yahweh God made the earth and the heavens, before any plant of the field existed in the earth, and before any herb of the field had sprouted, because Yahweh God had not sent rain upon the earth, nor was there a man to work the ground, but a stream went up from the earth and watered the entire face of the ground. Yahweh God formed the man out of the soil of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Genesis 2:4b-7.
This type of pre-creation introduction is incredibly common in Mesopotamian literature, both in Sumerian and Akkadian texts. For example, in the Sumerian composition Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld,
In those days, in those distant days, in those nights, in those remote nights, in those years, in those distant years, in days of yore when the necessary things have been brought into manifest existence, in days of yore when the necessary things have been for the first time properly cared for, when bread had been tasted for the first time in the shrines of the land, when the ovens of the land had been made to work, when the heavens had been separated from the earth, when the earth had been delimited from the heavens, when the fame of mankind had been established, when On had taken the heavens for himself, when Enlil had taken earth for himself, when the netherworld had been given to Ereshkigal as a gift.
Another example of this can be seen in a bilingual Sumerian-Akkadian incantation from the mid-1st millennium BCE. The text opens,
A pure house, a house of the gods had not yet been built in a pure place. A reed had not yet come out. A tree had not yet been created. A brick not yet laid. A brick not yet made. A house not built. A city not built. A city not built. Animals not existing. Nippur not yet built. The Achor not built. Uruk not built. The Aana not yet built. The Apsu not built. Eridu not built. The pure house, the house of the gods, their residence, had not yet been built. All the countries were still a sea.
As you can see, these texts, and many others, contain creation themes in which the pre-existing state of reality is described, setting the stage for the creative act. This can be seen in Genesis 2 through 3.